What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Tech Talkin. It's Tuesday afternoon. Thank you guys for tuning in at 3 o'clock here. Hopefully, we're going to have a great show. I know we are. Brooks Beatty, one of my best friends and longtime fishing buddy, is our host today. And we're going to be talking about probably our favorite way to freshwater fish, and that's getting on a river, targeting smallmouth, largemouth, shoal bass. I mean, really, you name it, just river fishing in general. And we're going to be looking at how to break that down. So it's going to be a very interesting show. And it's a lot of stuff that I kind of learned along the years of where to look for fish. And Brooks has been river fishing since probably before I even got into it. And so wealth of knowledge there is going to be awesome. Coming up, we've got some cool topics. I'm going to try to do one really soon on breaking down crankbaits, how to, when and where to throw them, and, rod and reel setup, line setup. So I'm waiting to hear back from the guest host on that one. Don't want to make that announcement yet until I'm sure. I'm going to also do an episode on organization, just how to manage your tackle, both on and off the water. And then if you guys have any ideas, please put them in the comments and let us know. Gene's on. Thanks for watching, Gene, as always. I love seeing that you're always involved, and thanks so much for sharing it out there. Troy Biggs actually commented earlier and shared a link. If you guys see that in the comments, it's pretty funny. I had to click on it. It's might have been when EJ's motorhome kind of backed itself into the water with the help of a dog. Basically, I responded to that with, you got to create a little structure for the fish to live. Gene, again, thanks for watching as always. Good afternoon to you as well. Charlie, what's up? Another fellow river fisherman and Jackson kayak employee. He's done everything from build boats there. Now he's customer service and warranty department, so he's always working hard. So maybe you can extend your lunch if we go a little long, Charlie. But thank you guys for joining. Please post your questions in the comments, and I'll bring them on the screen so that Brooks can give those an answer. But let's bring him up. What's up, bud?
What's up?
So what you been into?
Well, the whole thing that everyone else has been into here lately. Unfortunately, not fishing enough, but
yeah,
we'll get it in there soon. Yeah,
well, it's been fun to kind of talk about and get back into the rigging aspects of figuring out, how to. I know my tackle has become way more organized, and my life in general, just because it's not being on the go so much. But you and I have been fishing together for, I don't know, 7 years now or something like that. And I think I can speak for both of us when I say that rivers are definitely hold a special place for us, as for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what, where we grew up and where we live. It's either that or lakes, and lakes get flooded, with tons of people and jet skis and all that stuff. So I think if you have that exploration kind of attitude like we do and mindset, getting out in the rivers and exploring was half the fun. And then you find out that there's really good fish in rivers, even small rivers. So
yeah, I think just the constant, moving and changing of the water, and just, lakes go up and down, and I know there's can be current and stuff, but with the river, it's always a different atmosphere, and you kind of have to learn, how to break those fish down. And I think we can get into that. I just want to pull some comments here. Appreciate that, Angel, watching from YouTube. Thank you guys for checking us out on YouTube as well, because we're live both there and here. And these episodes will live on. So if you have to go or miss out, or you would like to go back and watch some of the awesome ones we had, like last week we did a chatterbait breakdown. We've done sight fishing for reds, and you can go on back, and these episodes are there. What's up? It says Charles Levi Jr., but you'll always be Redfish Chuck to us, I think. Chuck had a lot to do with me getting on the team back in the day, on the Jackson team. So been a friend for a long time, even before Brooks and I knew each other.
Have you ever told him how much you wish that he wasn't already Redfish Chuck?
Yeah, Redfish Redding does have an awesome ring to it for sure. I don't think I've told Chuck that, but even though he doesn't go by it as much, probably, I don't know if he does or not. But yeah, it kind of stinks that you took that before me, because Redfish Redding is awesome. Rainbow Redding, which I was given on a day I could catch nothing but rainbow trout and I was trying to catch a big brown. I don't like rainbow redding as much. So what's up, Daniel? Thanks for watching. Let's see here. Just Roach is better to have great aim or be a little lucky. That's a good question. We'll have to get into this.
It's a deadly combo.
Yeah, maybe it's yeah, I don't know. That is a deadly combo. Well, let's jump right into it. I want to play this video from a clip you and I on the river, along with Drew Gregory, who probably is one of the most well-known kayak river fishermen, and been such a big part of just pushing river fishing in a kayak, and even helping with the roughing it redding. Gene Wilson says, sorry I had to say that, but this video is just a quick little thing that we did last year for bending branches, but I wanted to play a little segment of that just because to me this kind of embodies what it's about.
Even the name, where it all begins.
Where it all begins. You like throwing them big whopper ploppers. Look at that dude. Yeah. Crushing.
Boy, did she crush it.
To quote Brooks, buddy.
I got that one from my buddy Megan off.
That's right. And I think you've got some photos fishing from with him, and also we'll pull some of those up in a minute. There's Drew with a nice river smallie. There's just something about it. You can see the current and just being able, when they're on and they're in that moving water, and it's just, they live in that moving water and have to fight that current constantly. It's hard not to, just feel how strong these fish are. And the difference, I would take a 4 or 5 pound river bass, over a 7 pound lake bass pretty much any day of the week.
Yep.
On the fly rod.
Yeah, getting there. Another one of our buddies, KG. He's been a river rat for a long time.
To me, this is what kayaks are kind of designed for. I'm gonna pull this down, but I wanted to get back into that to you. So how did you get really into the kayak fishing thing?
It was actually, I was working at Pure Fishing at the time, back before I worked with Jackson, and one of the brands, I think it was Berkeley, we were looking at making some like kayak fishing specific tools and stuff like that. And I'd seen Drew's stuff around, and some advertisements and stuff at Bass Pro Shops. He was doing seminars back in the day, and hit him up, brought him in for a meeting, and afterwards went to lunch, just got talking about stuff. And it's actually kind of what led me to leaving from there and going to work for Jackson. That's the short version of it. It's much longer than that, but yeah. And then he was like, well, wanted to get a better idea, why don't you come out fishing with me? And so we went out one day, and it's actually that same river where we were just fishing is where we went. And I don't know, it definitely just clicked. It took me back to being a kid, because before that it was very tournament heavy. In college I fished a lot of tournaments and stuff, and coming out of college I was fishing, and it was very like go. I mean, when you're out there fishing, it was more of a job, and to get these limits and catch these fish versus just going out and enjoying nature again, and like the beauty of it, and kind of what we did as kids, where you rode around your neighborhood or up to a little pond or creek and went fishing. And so when I was out there on the river with Drew, that like it all clicked back, and I was like, man, I was like, I got to get out of this office job and figure out how to do this on the regular.
I think the river aspect of it too, you get to places, I mean, now a lot of people have kayaks, so I think it's less now than it was 10 years ago. But for me, like, it introduced places to me that I couldn't access really any other way without some type of a paddle sport, or vessel that I could paddle, whether it be a canoe or a kayak. And the kayak is just way more sense if you're, fishing solo and able to have the sit on top, and carry your gear and equipment, especially with the way they're designed these days. But being able to get to a place that was less pressured, and that's like what led me to kayaks. I was already fishing these rivers, like wading them, trying to find spots. But you look on the map, and I think we'll get to that in a second. You're going to pull up Google Maps and kind of show people how to break it down. But you see these areas that you're like, I know there's got to be fish there. I just don't have access to that spot without floating from one end, or one place to the next place to the takeout. And so like that's where I started kayak fishing, was specifically to access areas in a river. So it is to me where kayaks shine and where kayak fishing shines.
Yeah.
I know you've got some pictures as well of on the jet boat, but I wanted to pull up this photo here because this kind of shows what that river life, like you said, is all about. Just having that water moving and just being able to chill and hang out. We got to get another camping trip up together soon.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite aspects of river and kayak fishing. And me and my buddy Dan, and I've done it with you and Drew as well. But we at least would try to get in once a year to do an overnight trip where you float, set up camp, pack in. It's not too much to pack in for one night, and you can actually fish a longer stretch of river than you could on your regular kind of 7-mile average float trip. So it's been, I don't think I got one in last year, so I'm definitely due for one of those coming up. That picture right there is like, I need it.
It definitely, I mean, it is kind of what it's all about. I know in that video that I shared, we camped and really just had a blast. And, you're right there at the water and you could be catching fish in just a matter of like minutes after you launch. And I've done some 3 and 4 day trips, but this is getting back into OG Brooks right here, just to show a couple of the fish you can find in the river. I wanted to pull a couple of these up, and then I want to get into, actually breaking down the river.
Yeah.
But you've been, this is back when Jackson still made the superficial. So this is a pretty old pic, but getting out there and getting it. I don't know what you're doing in this photo.
I was smelling what she had for lunch.
Yeah. And then you know what to throw, huh?
Yeah.
Some studs. Now this is Dan's jet boat.
Yeah.
So, and again, these fish are constantly fighting current. So, I mean, to catch a river fish is that's a giant.
That was down in Texas in the middle of summer, middle of the day on topwater, like things people say you're not supposed to do.
And that's Texas too. I remember that bite. I think we rolled out. That was a camping trip. We rolled out of the tent. I heard you make a cast. Next thing I know, you were on a fish.
It was a weird fish. It was one of the longest fish I've ever caught, but it was not fat. It was not fat.
What's up, Mitchell? He's like in the next room. So, what's up, Cindy? Gene says, love the feeling of what a campfire by the river picture evokes. Yeah, we need to do that soon. All right, so I want to get into this, and I think you can share your screen. But before we get to that, you're going to fish a river. Let's start breaking down, kind of dig right into it. Let's break down, like, what determines where you want to put in and what section of river you're going to fish. How do you
I mean, a lot of
new places and stuff like that.
Yeah, a lot of that kind of unfortunately does depend on takeouts. So I mean, either that or you can get real creative and reach out to people that maybe know the area, or done as much as gone knocking on doors. But a lot of that does depend on bridges and public ramps and stuff like that. But then I generally try to look for something it depends on if it's a full day float or a half day float, but 7 miles is kind of, if you're going to fish it, that's about the max that I try to do on a day. And then, once you find those 2 access points where you're going to, set up your float, then look at the stuff in between, the shoals and rapids, deep stretches, if there's a bunch of laydowns, if it's a dam up ahead, or from the start. And that's another thing, is if it's a free flowing river, or if it's a most of them are in the southeast or have dams on them. But and then that leads me into then researching about release schedules, what the average flow is, what the current flow is, which I can share some of that, I guess. But
so a lot of that, for me too, is like, you kind of go, like, if it's a new river and you got a spot that kind of looks fishy, you might base on like, well, I've caught fish in this other river with very similar, attributes, whether it's the flow or the bottom, the rocks, that those different species are going to be in the same water, but you can kind of mimic that. But once you start going to a place, let's say you've got, 4 or 5 spots that are your go-to spots, what determines where you're going to fish in that stretch of river? And like you said too, you do want to touch on that. You said 7 miles is kind of your max. I always try to figure about an hour per mile, unless it's really good. And there's certain places I can go and spend all day in 1 mile stretch. Like
that time I went to the Susky. I mean, we fished one shoal. We fished one shoal all day.
There's too much. I guess a lot depends on the width of the river too, but yeah. So I mean, when it comes down to like breaking down a stretch of river, what are some of the things that come into play there for you?
I mean, a big thing is time of year. That's kind of where I start. If it's colder time of year, I generally try to look for deeper stretches because I've been more successful in deeper, slower stuff, and I end up having to slow down my presentation in those, in that type of water. But if it's, post spawn and through the summer and fall, I like to look for rapids and quick moving water, stuff that's oxygenated, keeps the fish happy, keeps them active, and keeps them, feeding more aggressively.
Do you find that when you're on a stretch of river, and actually if you want to bring up that those charts and the Google stuff too, we can kind of show that, but are different species holding the different patterns? I mean, I feel like they are, especially, I mean, there's definitely some crossover, but for the most part, if a river's got 2 or 3 different species of fish that I'm targeting, say spotted bass, largemouth, and smallmouth, I kind of catch them in different zones.
For sure. No, they're definitely, I think different species react differently. Spotted bass are just animals. They're everywhere. But largemouth, I think, a little bit more dependent on time of year. And then smallmouth just generally like, I think, that more aggressive kind of water.
More in the rapids and the highly oxygenated stuff.
For sure. Where they can feed like aggressively, stuff's floating through. But yeah, I mean, there's a river down in South Carolina that I fished some, but back when I actually lived down in South Carolina, just a good bit. But it's below Lake Murray, so I mean it's dam, and so there's, but based on the dam, there are like release schedules and stuff like that. Which here I'll actually share some of that first.
Okay.
Let's see.
Let's back up like this. So you're talking about a dam while you're pulling that up. I mean, that is one thing for me, and it's not so much the big like power plant dams, but I do feel like they also come into play. But all the rivers, like a lot of them have old mill dams or old power plant dams that are smaller, and I love fishing below a dam. I don't know what it is. I like it, and I like being able to break down that water. And it's weird because sometimes it's when they turn the water on and sometimes it's when they turn the water off. And I don't know that I understand it, but you find out what works in that spot. And it's funny because he says here that he did everything wrong according to the books, but outfished everyone. And that's kind of the way it is sometimes. Some places fish better low water and some places fish better high water, but you got to learn what those things are and kind of take a look back.
And each fishery will, react differently, I'm sure.
Right.
And, like this is public information that's out there. You can find it almost any river, especially where there's a dam. But, this one has a lot of information. It gives you the temperature, recent precipitation, the discharge, this is one of the key things for sure to look at. It'll give you the median there. So what the average is. So, you can base off of that, is the water high, is it low? Is it safe to float, kind of stuff? And the gauge height, is basically, it's real similar to the discharge, is what they're, kind of releasing it at, how much water is coming out. I like the dissolved oxygen. That's cool to see. A lot of them don't necessarily have that, but just stuff you can look at, and you can back this stuff out for like months, years. You can sit here and spend a ton of time researching on this stuff. And then the other thing, let's see, I'll stop that one. And this is what I liked about when I lived down there, is there was actually a release schedule. Let's see, share screen. That you could look and see what the plan was for the day.
James is not right in the head.
What did he say?
So I usually taste the water. If there's a high level of fish poo in taste, I know I'm close. I think James is full of fish poo, actually. That makes sense. It's a technique I haven't tried yet, but I'm open. I've heard people doing it with saltwater fish. Salinity levels. Am I saying that right? So touching on what you're talking about there, I actually have an app too called River Data on my phone. And that's a great way to, like, while you're out there, if stuff is just going off, make note of what those levels are, because more than likely that's going to repeat itself when the levels are right. And I know we've got a couple of fisheries that you and I like to fish that if it's not in that area, we just don't even waste our time going. And it's not to say the fish aren't there, but we know how it can be when that level is right. And if it's going to be, because this river fishing can be a little bit more work. So it's like, you kind of have those plans based on where you went. So it's really important, in my opinion, to document or at least like somehow mark or remember those good days and what the river was doing. And then same with the bad days. If it's a bad day, you want to know like what to avoid when you're looking at the river.
But yeah, so when I was living down in Columbia, they had this one actually told you what they were planning on doing, which was cool because I knew if I got off work, I was like, oh, they're about to release water. I'm gonna go catch these striper, below the dam, like it's about to turn on. And that was also cool to know, like, oh no, it's gonna be way too high. Like it's not worth my time to go down there. And actually back then I didn't even have a kayak. I was just fishing from the bank and waiting and stuff like that. With some of my buddies down there. There's some good times. Caught some good fish. And I mean, I remember swimming across like little small channels, like holding your fishing rod up and like your little tackle bag and like with one arm trying to get across the channel because you could see fish busting. I was like, man, it would be nice to have a kayak in this.
Well, and that's actually what led me again to getting a kayak. Me and Eric Krause and another friend, Scott Hedrick, we would do that and, be dragging our tackle bags behind us and trying to figure it out. Billy Rossini, we got a lot of comedians on here today. So Billy from Naqua Adventure Gear says that I don't know which one of us he's talking about, but one of us has something hanging out of our nose.
Oh, you got more, so I'm thinking it's you.
Mine's just a filter; it just catches stuff. So Gene says, "I'm not used to fishing dam rivers. How much lead time and how accurate are the release times and notifications?" So the release times usually are pretty accurate because the dam is, if they're going to release, they'll let you know. And as far as like, I would say like how accurate is the gauge? I think they update usually most of the gauges about every hour or so. So you can kind of look at that and see a trend if it's going down or up. But some rivers are going to be more like, it's going to take like a bad rainstorm to make them jump up real high. It's not like they're going to just start releasing and like, but and you don't know what's going to happen. But other rivers, they'll just like turn them on. And one of Brooks and I's favorite rivers to fish, we don't ever really know when what they're doing and when. So you try to pattern it, but it's just all over the place. So sometimes we leave kind of on a gamble that, well, it might work out, and then you get there and it doesn't, but you're there, so you fish anyway. But for the most part, a lot of the rivers you can predict pretty well depending on the rain and what's going on upstream and when that release schedule is. And you can call a lot of these dams, I know. So like, don't be afraid to try to reach out and find out what's going to be going on.
Remember, I hope we're not telling on him, but our buddy Neil Andritz up in PA, him and his wife, they have little tackle and kayak shop up there on the river, and they got really good to be good friends with the operators, and they would at least get notified if they couldn't even influence the release a little bit, because they'd be putting people on the river, and like deliver some brownies. It might get an early release kind of thing.
No, we need that deal on a couple of the rivers that we fish for sure. If you could just turn that off for a few hours.
But then as far as for what Gene was talking about, and just because the water releases at the dam, at 2:00, it's going to take a while to get downstream. So, you have to account for that water flow, just because, you might, if you're 10 miles downstream, it's going to take a while. So you have to account for that in your plan for fishing.
And a lot of times there'll be more gauges, but some smaller rivers don't have a lot of gauges, and they may only have a gauge right at a dam or whatever. And so what you're reading, like you said, on that dam could be before or after, what's going on. So, what I like about that River Data app, and I'm sure there's, places you can go online, but with that app, you can actually put in your location or, look on a map based on where you want to go. And it's kind of like what I showed for any of you guys that watched the inshore sight fishing one, where I have the Navionics app and can look at the tide buoys for the closest one to the location I'm fishing. The River Data app is kind of like that. You can pull up a map and look at where you're fishing, and then find the closest gauge to that, and then you can kind of start to build a plan. But all right, so you've selected where you're going to fish, and you had that map pulled up earlier. I'd like to, if you want to pull that back up, but talk about, how to break down the water itself as you float a stretch of river, and how to kind of know what to avoid or where to find fish in certain times of the year and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, to start at the dam, above that's the lake. If I can fish, which some of these tips is like, man, do I really want to tell them? But like this dam, you can't go above this little safety area. But if I can fish on the dam, I would.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, I'll zoom out and kind of look at it from like a bird's eye view, even further away. There's no real big river bends here. It's pretty straightforward. You figure there's a lot of water coming out of there. So that's generally going to be a deeper stretch once you break away from that dam. It's a little bit slower. And then I want to, go down and see like when do I get to see, rapids, shoals, any big river bends. And that's, because I like to have a mix of it all in my float, because if they're not biting in the rapids, then I want a good deep stretch to fish. But you can see some shoals here, and it's right in a river bend. So this to me is like there's a lot of good stuff going on, and depending on the time of year, depends on whether I focus above, the shoals, below the shoals, in the shoals. I think.
Well, I think what I like about the river too is that, like you said, if you've got that good mix of, deeper holes, shoals, river bends, you got kind of you can find a pattern throughout your, and then just repeat that, not be afraid. Like the guy said earlier, if you're fishing and you think you've got them, or they should be in the shoal, but they're not. Well, don't spend all day trying to catch them there. Maybe move. And I know, like, time of year definitely, and water temp definitely plays a big part in that, and also what species you're fishing for. So they're showing like the shoals there. Like you said, smallmouth. If it's a smallmouth river, in the warmer months, can be up there right in that oxygenated water. And then like if it was largemouth mixed in with them, I would say you move it out of the shoal into some of these river bends on the outside of the bend where your deeper stretches and cuts are going to be, would probably be more of your largemouth type spot. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, for sure. And then, spots in between rapids can definitely hold. And something when I first started that I would overlook the push water a ton. And there's a lot of deeper areas there in the push water above the rapids. And fish will hold there. They may not be as aggressive as the fish below the rapid, but they can be. But it's definitely always worth, because the water's wanting to pull you down, and you want to get down there and fish that stuff where they're generally more active. But it's definitely worth it to slow down and fish the push water as well.
Got a lot of big fish in the push water. So let's zoom in on that rapid and kind of tell people, some of the terms we use: push water, rapids, river bend, eddies. Like, let's just, like, if we can get a clear shot of a rapid, let's break down, where to throw and what to look at.
So I mean, this being there's a little slow stretch between these rapids, likely a little bit deeper in here, but then the push water, I mean, it depends on the river and how deep it is and how wide it is. And, the current generally will start to pick up. Like when you have a deep, slow stretch, the current slows down because it's got more area to fill. But as it starts getting back up here, once that water to me starts kind of picking back up, is kind of that push water where it wants to, pull you down the rapid.
Right.
And then you start, I mean, it's kind of the easy thing to spot is the current breaks and the eddies. Those are always like very key things, but don't slack on, lay downs or things coming off the bank.
Or they're going to create the same kind of thing. So when you're talking about an eddy, and I know a lot of people in here probably know, but basically where you've got your mouse there, that boulder. So as it creates that current break, and the water will actually kind of turn and go back up towards that structure in the river. And where that seam is between the swifter water and the current kind of going back up, is just churning, food. And I know a lot of times, especially smallmouth, but really everything, or they may be spawning right up against that rock or right up in that, because it's protected. But if they're going to feed, they can literally just move right to that edge, and it's like a conveyor belt. It's bringing stuff to them. So I like to sit downriver, face upriver if I can, and make those casts kind of at an angle on either side of that structure, that rock, whatever it may be.
Like if you say you were sitting here and you'd cast up this way, bring it down these edges.
Yeah.
And I mean, I will fan cast and hit this. If I think one's there, I'll hit it 2 or 3 times, or maybe throw a different bait. And then, then you move to the next one, and then even before that, I'll fish them, the wrong way. And sometimes they'll come out and eat it, and then, when I say wrong way, you would think stuff would be floating down river this way, and something wouldn't be going this way. But if it was scared enough, bait fish would certainly go against the grain, or against the flow there.
That's why they call it angling, because you're going to try every angle you can to definitely find a bite.
Now, generally, occasionally largemouth will be in the heavy stuff, but if they're tucked up against something. They're big lazy fish. I don't find them too much in the real crazy. That'd be like spotted bass, smallmouth, striper. Actually, on this river, I've caught striper, and I've caught like 40 striper in like one little hole.
I know shoal bass too in the rivers and actually a giant picture of a shoal bass. I'm going to bring that up, but not that there are shoal bass in that river at all, but if there were and it was time for them to spawn, they would definitely look at all these giant fish. I should just bring this down till I find it actually.
I good.
Just scrolling through your all your fish, but you can keep talking about that. I'll look for this picture.
Yeah, I was trying to find that spot where I told you me and my buddy swam across. I was trying to remember. That was and then by the time we got to the spot we wanted to fish, lightning was cracking, and it was one of those good river days where you're like, what am I doing? But yeah, so this stretch that I'm looking at right now is there's a lot of good rapids, a lot of good bends, and then it hits a confluence here with another river.
Dirty water in that river.
Yeah. And that's another. That's a ton of good opportunity for fish to feed. They have a lot of access to stuff there. Yeah. And then after that, it kind of slows up and deepens up again and just straightens out. So, if I was to plan a float there, I would maybe look at this bridge, or a bridge below all the craziness, and something up above it where I could fish both slow and quick moving water. Just like you said, you can put all the right pieces together, and they should be in this area, but they're still fish, and I don't speak fish yet, so I haven't been able to find one to tell me what they really want.
So as you're going down through there, when we start talking about time of year and kind of water temps and the different areas, I know for the most part, and I would say this is probably accurate for most black bass species, but definitely smallmouth for sure. But those deeper sections, and it ain't in every deep section. It does seem that they congregate in the winter, and they're all going to school up in a certain section that they really like. And you think, well, this is no different than another, but there's things you might not be able to see. But those deeper sections kind of between rapids or whatever are going to be your good wintering spots. And then as you move into the spring, they're going to start to transition into the swifter, more oxygenated water. But I know for me, on a lot of the rivers that I fish, as it gets into those warmer, hotter months, you'll see more largemouth, say, moving up from a lake. So a lot of times I like to fish the headwaters of a lake in the late, hottest part of the summer, the July and August months, because you'll get fish that move out of that lake, whether it's striper or hybrids or largemouth, will move up the river to get that more oxygenated, cooler water, because typically the lake water might not be, holding as cool. So I do like to do that. But then it's kind of with smallmouth, I've noticed that as it gets hotter, you'll catch a lot of fish in those same rapids, but the size goes way down, right? You start catching all the small fish. The bigger fish, to me, tend to kind of hold maybe right off the rapid in a little bit deeper water, but they'll move up there right before dark. I know when we were fishing, even on the Susquehanna, which wasn't even that warm, it was October, but we were getting a lot of big fish bites in the swift water, but right at dark. And the same happened to me on the New River before in a tournament where I fished, all afternoon, no bites, and right at dark, topwater turned on in the spot that I had been hitting just relentlessly. So I think the fish kind of hold a pattern somewhere right around that, and then kind of can move into that spot. So it really does become like dependent on water temps and stuff. And, so you don't throw anything, like you said, out the window. You definitely want to kind of break everything down. Jim at some points wants to see you with your hat off, apparently. A little tease.
I might wait till the end. Keep the viewers hanging on.
So here we got a question from Billy. He says, have you ever kayaked or know anything about kayaking the Saluda further up northwest part of South Carolina, just downstream for Table Rock State Park?
I'm not familiar necessarily with Table Rock State Park, but I have fished the Saluda on the other side of the lake before, and it was mostly striper that were caught up there. It was really pretty water. I did have private access on that float, so I can't. It would probably take me a while to go through this and figure it out. But yeah, I've not spent much time on the other side of the Saluda, but it's a healthy river. I know that much. It feeds Lake Murray. Comes down out of the mountains. The territories, the green. Yeah, this was kind of the area where below Lake Greenwood that I fished a couple times, and it was pretty good. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't know too much up that way. But I'd fish it similarly. I mean, I'd plan on big largemouth and striper.
So I know for me, like, looking at river sections, even if there is access, that doesn't always mean that it's a great area to fish. And I know, like, I'm going to use the New for an example. The areas I fish in the New, there's some good access points. But if I'm looking at the map and I see the long, like, deeper stretches, like you were talking about, no bends, no rapids really, or if I see long stretches of just really shallow water, there's no like shoals, there's no deep pockets, there's no big boulders. It's just a long stretch of shallow. And that place, trying not to share too many locations here, but the place you can't on the New, like right out in front of that camp, and that section for probably the next 5 to 10 miles. Not saying you can't catch fish there, but I've never done well in that section because it's all just kind of the same, right? There's not a lot of changes. Right. So I think what you were sharing earlier about really looking for areas where you get a good mix of water, whether it's having some rapids and then some deep cuts and some river bends and things like that, or even if you get it's broken up by islands, it's typically going to have some shoals. Yeah. But you don't want too much of any of those. Like, you don't want it all to be shoals, and you don't want it all to be deep water with nothing going on. And again, I think fish hold there, but there's just not going to be as much congregation, for them to be there. But, as far as like tackle goes, I wanted you to touch on that just a little bit. I know earlier in the pregame, you kind of were talking about how you have that one box, and I'm sure it changes based on exactly what river and what species you're targeting. But I know for me, man, I take kind of the same thing. I've got 2 or 3 boxes. So what's your go-to, say spring? Let's go springtime.
I could definitely fish, a river out of one box for sure. Which part I need to go, but oh no! Don't be showing that over there. How do we block that over there?
No, you're in your bedroom. Oh, I got it.
But it's springtime. Springtime. I'm hunting big fish. I'm gonna throw probably big jigs, big worms.
That's a giant jig.
Yeah, that's about one of the biggest ones I throw. But crankbaits, depending on they all came out together. I don't like red crankbaits. In the springtime, I do. I love a red crankbait, especially if the water's a little stained. Always have chatterbaits in the box. All the flavors. But
so it is to me like you kind of went from one end of the spectrum to the other. From even though it's a big jig, it's still a slower moving profile that you're going to work slow. But I guess you kind of in the spring is when you start figuring out that transition of the fish, and you kind of give them that big profile, slow moving thing. If they're going to eat one, you're presenting it, but then you move into the faster stuff as they begin to start to become more aggressive and start spawning and that kind of thing.
Yeah, springtime, you can be out there one day and it's a slow bite, and then the next day it's they're aggressive. So I feel like you kind of got to have both they're ready for whatever they're telling you. have more confidence in like a big slow bait like a jig, as far as if I'm trying to go for a big fish. I mean, a lot of those fish that you were showing earlier were caught on the jig. Push water, deep slow stretches. I've even swam and hopped them down through currents, and then at the eddy, at the end of the eddy, you let it just kind of fade out, and they'll thump it right there. So I mean, that's probably now there's times where I'll fish it for 2 or 3 hours and just like fishing slow and hard and no bite. So it gets a little bit of a mental struggle there, but it's one of those things I feel like if I stick with it, it's usually worth it. And it's also I like fishing with a friend that's doing something different,
See what's working. That's I mean, that's a good thing. Like if you both, may want to throw the same thing in the morning when you get on the water, but it's always a good idea, I think, to have a couple of go-tos that you can kind of start eliminating stuff. And I know for me, this, I'm not like, I do like throwing the more power fishing type stuff, which I have evolved into that. When I first started really river fishing a lot, I was a Senko guy, man. I loved throwing Senko's wacky rig, and a lot of those river bends that you were talking about earlier, you get that river bend, the outside of that bend is usually going to be a deeper cut up against the bank, and you can throw something like a jig or Senko or whatever, and just let the current kind of push it into where those fish are just sitting there waiting on a meal to be brought to them. And I think too, that's going to be obviously more of your, if you've got a river that has smallmouth and largemouth, that would probably be where I would target more of the largemouth in that little bit slower moving water where they can get, just tucked up against the bank, or if it's out in the middle, it might be a boulder or whatever. But as I move into the rapids, I'm ready to throw. Like,
oh yeah,
they're not ready to eat a chatterbait or a crankbait or something moving, that I'm just pretty much not ready to catch them yet. It's like,
I'm with you. I mean, anytime I hit the river, there's always a top water and, something tied on that's fun and, aggressive way to catch them. And that's always the hopes, is that you catch them that way, because it's way more exciting.
Right.
But always, prepared with something, slow down. And if it's not a jig, then it's probably like a decent sized worm on a shaky head. In the river, I know people catch really big fish finesse style fishing. I tend to lean towards a fish that's either going to be aggressively eating or wants a big meal. I throw bigger baits in the river than I do even in small, skinny water than I do in like a lake. I end up, because lakes get so much more pressure, I feel like, and the fish have more, I don't know, they're choosier. I think we're in a river, you can kind of pick apart and get the bigger fish from the bigger baits. But I mean, in a chat, like, and I guess that's another thing I didn't really think about earlier, but 4 to 5 rods is usually what I like to take with me. I don't want to have an overload of stuff. I like, if I got 3 rod holders behind me, and then maybe 1 off the side and 1 in front of me. That way I can keep everything kind of manageable, because you can get in some hairy situations in the river.
Right.
And don't want to have too much going on. So, with 5 rods, there's usually like something like a crankbait / topwater rod. Chatterbait is always on in the river. Something like a jig. I probably have 2, like, kind of what I consider like, medium heavy, setting the hook into a fish, so like a worm and a jig. There's usually 2 of those. And then I'll usually have 1 spinning rod, just in case, like, big swim baits for sure.
Is that what this? I'm going to bring up the shoal bass. That was on a big swim bait.
Actually, that was a big that was a chatterbait with a big swim bait on it. It was a
combo bait. Yeah,
let's see if I have anything that. I mean, I think I had like a 6. I mean, it was a chatterbait about like this, but then I had a 6-inch swim bait on it.
Project Z with the swimmers.
Yeah. So it was a giant bait.
Well, and so, I've had Bill Schultz, who's a smallmouth like guy, finesse fisherman, and he throws a lot of small stuff, and elephants eat peanuts. Listen, I get it. Big fish are caught on small stuff. In fact, on the river, you and I were fishing, and I just put a Ned rig on because I was struggling for other bites, and threw it where it looked like a fish might, spawn, and picked up probably about a 4.5, 5 pound largemouth on it, on the little 3-inch TRD. But for me, it's hard. Like, I used to think smallmouth bass would only eat smaller baits. until we were messing around, goofing around, and one of my buddies was like, well, I'm going to throw this, sunfish, we call it like a brim on a rooster tail. And he's like, I'm going to throw that in there and catch a muskie. And it was like palm size, like this.
Yeah.
And he's like, just hooked it through the nose and threw it in there just to see what would happen. Yeah, bigger than that, dude. Yeah. I mean, and a smallmouth slammed it. Now, at first, he was like, I can't believe it. I hooked a muskie. No, it was one of the bigger smallmouth I had seen. And that just changed the whole mindset for me on like what to throw. Like I quit throwing those smaller baits for smallmouth. I mean, I still do. I keep them in the box, and there's times when I think you do have to downsize because they're just being super finicky or whatever. And, maybe they're just not feeding on that bait, so it looks out of place. But when they're feeding, man, I know you throw that big. Was it the 130? 160 while we're playing.
All my baits are coming out together, but yeah,
that's a good way to keep them. We're going to need you to tune into the organizational episode.
But yeah, I mean, there was like 2 or 3 years before that bait really took off that me and a couple buddies people look at you so silly, like when they saw that on your.
I did. When I saw you throw that, I'm like, what is this?
Yeah. And that's the other thing I love about a river is you can do stuff that doesn't make sense. I know you watched me bring a deep dabbing crankbait up through some trees like that were in 10 foot of water, but I was just working those tree limbs with that big crankbait, just smacking the crap out of them. And it was like wintertime, and you were like, what are you doing?
Yeah. And then it's like 4 or 5 pounder. And so funny story about that. We were going to get a picture of this particular fish. I'm going to share this, man. This is worthy of sharing. So we're going to get a picture of one of these fish that Brooks is talking about, but we wanted to get out of the current, get over to the side and get the camera out but keep the fish healthy, right? Which kind of backfired. So I kind of hate to share this because it's kind of sad, but things happen and you learn from them. I carried boga grips with me at the time, and I still do occasionally, but we're like, well, we'll just put them on the bogas, and they're attached to my kayak with a float attached to the boga grips so that if they do go over, I can not lose these, $170 boga grips. So I give the float, boga grips attached to the float to Brooks. He puts the fish on and proceeds to attach the float to the kayak and unattach the boga grip, thinking that he had attached the boga grip to the kayak, and then throws the fish over. Well, of course, the boga grips don't really float that well with the fish attached to them. So buy boga grips.
Yeah, I wonder if that fish ever moved from that spot.
Yeah.
I felt bad.
And so definitely pay attention to that kind of stuff. And then I've seen you use the fish grips to kind of do the same thing, and the paddle clipped them or whatever and release 6 pounders before.
Had a few unfortunate. that first one was just I must have been somewhere else. Must have been thinking about a date that I'd been on or something. Who knows? wasn't paying attention to the.
Do you recommend any rivers in the Carolinas that are great for fishing or camping? I mean, I camp and fish on the New. I know that you have to be careful because there's a lot of land there that might be.
You're speaking his language. That's one of my. I know I've told you about my camp trip that I go on with my buddies. He's one of the camp trippers, so he's.
Oh yeah. That's why he's asking if you recommend any in the Carolinas because you got a spot. Yeah, that's the spot that you could share that spot because that's the section that I don't think fishes that well. Maybe we should tell people what does fish great.
Yeah, no, it's had a lot of good memories on that stretch. Not fish related, just with my buddies.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, you don't have to catch the fish all the time, and that's why I like river fishing. I mean, I ran into bears on the river, seen all kinds of crazy stuff. Gene says, same here on larger baits. I catch the little swannies on the same big stuff I catch the big largies on, and she catches some big largies. But, they fish, look, aggressive fish like bass and even redfish and trout and saltwater. I mean, they'll eat a fish that you're just like, there's no way that they can eat that. What's up, Chris? Chris Fowler, another fellow river fisherman, fly guy, loves carp fishing in the rivers. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Yeah, he's been a little bit of my inspiration to get into fly fishing. And even, I guess even somewhat we talk about fishing these same stretches that and unfortunately, I hate to say this, but like sometimes they lose some of their luster, like, okay, I've caught 4 and 5 pounders here time and time again. And that's partly what led me into wanting to get into fly fishing more. Because like you catch that same fish on a fly rod, it was a lot more work, it was a lot more effort. Whenever it's like archery versus rifle hunting, you know.
Yeah, it is kind of the natural progression of, you know, it's not that it doesn't become challenging, but you want to change it up or find new ways to keep it challenging. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like I have never been one to say like, oh, you can't throw bait or you can't throw this or you're fly only. And I know a lot of guys are like, oh, you're a conventional guy or you're throwing bait. When I first started river fishing, listen, I carried a flow troll with me, and not only would I buy shiners on the way there, but if I could catch, you know, if I could throw the rooster tail, when I found out those smallmouth would eat, you know, hand-sized brim, I'm catching brim, you know, and I'm putting them in the flow troll, and then I'm sending them out to feed it, you know, feed a bigger guy. And you know, I've transitioned from doing that into just finding baits that or lures that mimic those live baits that I now know that those fish are eating. And I think you got to pay attention to, and that's another thing to look into. What does your river have for bait fish? You know, are they eating shad? Are they eating, you know, smaller, like, you know, shiners? What is the bait that the fish are feeding on in there?
And to that point, I think sometimes those big baits in the river, they will call out a fish that would stay hunkered down because they have to expend a lot more energy in the current to go get, you know, their meal. So a bigger bait is, you know, I think has a drawing power in the river that it doesn't always have in a lake.
Right.
So hence why, you know, tend to go big or go home. But I mean, there's been days where I've thrown a weightless fluke on braid in the, you know, and catching smallmouth and just reeling as fast as I could. I mean, it's, you know, it just skipping across the top. Right. And that was one of the most fun days of fishing I ever had. But I would say 90% of the time I'm going big or going home in the river. I mean, it's fun.
So what you just said is a good point. I think a lot of people do this, not just on a river, but even saltwater, freshwater, whatever. But always having that follow-up bait too, like the weightless fluke or some type of small swim bait, you know, plastic.
Drew's great at
it, or something like that.
Drew's great at it. He'd miss a fish on a chatterbait and then he'd throw a bigger streaks in there. And I mean, I saw it time and time again. I'm like, dang. Like that's,
I mean, no, for sure. Fishing with him is definitely where I started when I started, you know, doing that. And, you know, whether it's throwing a spook and then they miss it, they hit it, you know, you want to just fire it right back in there. But a lot of times they won't come back on it the second time. But if you throw, like you said, a weighted fluke or even an unweighted fluke and just, you know, get it down, or like we throw, I know both of us are Z-Man guys, so a lot of times I'll have to weight that because the plastic is so buoyant. Right. If you don't, it will just be on the surface. But yeah, I mean, definitely following up with another bait is important.
I'm sure most people watching this probably understand that. But if a fish hit a top water but missed it, you know, in their head they injured that bait, so they don't want to see it, you know, still going across the top. If that, you know, that weightless fluke is just kind of like, oh, it got hit and it's, you know, it's injured and struggling. That's what that draw, you know, that appeal on that follow-up bait is. And I think that's why they obviously it works, you know, because it's, I mean, I think it just mimics it really well, and that's why it works, you know, that follow-up style.
Yeah. So I want to recap this, and then we've got a few more minutes. I want to recap what we talked about real quick, and then I want to get into some things that you just have to have kind of rigged on your boat. If you're going to go river fishing, that it's just like, if I don't have this, I don't even want to go. But to recap, if you're breaking down a new river, look for areas that have a lot of different things going on. So good areas to put in and take out. If you can't have a put in and a takeout and you're going to do a solo trip, you can always go upriver. And we didn't really talk about that, but if you find an area that has a good selection of deeper cuts, push water, some rapids or bends in the water, a lot of times you can just work your way up through that. And I think getting into things that I always try to have in my river boat, one of those things would be able to drag your boat upriver. If you do get to a shoal and you want to get to the top of it, don't be afraid to get out. It's super easy to drag a lighter kayak or up the river.
That's definitely one thing I haven't hit on much today, but I used to always stay on my kayak. Now, I mean, if I get to a spot that's good and, you know, you're fighting your kayak to stay in position, I mean, I get out, you know,
Yeah,
You
yeah. Use it as a transportation. It doesn't have to be what you fish from.
you either dress to get out in that colder water, or if it's warmer, then just wait around. But like to what you were getting at, I think is having a way to tie it off to myself or anchor it up to where I can get out and fish as well. I've caught. I mean, it lets you slow down and fish that area without just blowing through it. And on that same thing, a drag chain. I mean, I keep it pretty simple in the river just because there's a lot going on. I don't want. I used to do a power pole. I'd still love a power pole in the flats and stuff, but in the river, I'm pretty much drag chain. And
so talk about what a drag chain is there. For people who don't know.
I mean, there's several different ways. Originally, the way we used to do it was with the dog leash, retractable dog leash, and you took some like logging chain out the back, and it would slow you down without anchoring necessarily into a spot. Now, if the flow was slow enough, you would completely stop. But it's just a way to slow down and fish because there's current, and you'll just blow through a really good area. So it's a way to do that for sure. And then
I don't like the call style anchors and stuff like that in a river situation because if they catch, it's sometimes really hard to
fast current.
It's hard to get back. So I always tell people that if you're going to anchor in a river, which I don't recommend, is to carry that knife on your PFD so you can quickly get rid of that line if you need to. Because I mean, that's the other thing. Safety is definitely a thing. So always have. I don't like an inflatable PFD on the river. I like one that's going to have the flotation built into it. I don't have to worry about if I fall out pulling a ripcord or something.
I promise if you ever been falling out in a rapid that you weren't ready for, you didn't want to. You don't have time to think about that.
And then dressing for the water. I know we've both experienced a guy that we're pretty sure was pretty experiencing hypothermia because he was wearing clothes for the daytime, which was nice and warm, and he fell in the water and then it got dark on us. And next thing you know, I mean, he was, in pretty bad shape by the time we got to the takeout. So being prepared for that is always important. Even if it feels warm outside, doesn't mean the water is warm. But yeah, a way to be able to control your boat is so important no matter what you're fishing or where you're fishing. I think the drag chain is super simple and easy. And I've seen people use window weights and dumbbells and anything like that that's smooth that you can drag and not worry about it. And you can also wrap your drag chain in like duct tape or put it inside a bicycle inner tube. And there's tons of videos about that online.
Quiets it down and makes it even more snag, proof. And something I haven't always done the best at because I've moved through boats, but an anchor trolley to where you can run it off the front and fish back upstream, I think is definitely a smart thing. I just end up usually turning around in my kayak and fishing backwards, but it's just not necessarily the best way to do it.
But Jody says the wacky Cinco works great, and that, like I said, when I first started river fishing, man, every bend in the river had a Cinco in it for me. So it definitely does. And it's just, you get, like you said about fly fishing, you kind of get to the point where you start to transition. And I've transitioned into being more of a power fishing guy for sure. Vang says, how do you catch fish on a river, man? You got to throw it over there and then bring it back over here. I think Jim said that.
Whatever. He's that dude
crushes.
He's messing with us. He's got the river dialed in. I'm trying to follow his GPS.
He needs to answer his own question and tell us how we catch him on the river. Well, I know people probably, it is so specific to, each river and the type of species where they're going to be and that kind of thing. But, again, to recap, look for a lot of stuff in the river, differences as far as, bends, deep water, shoals, things, and not just the same old straight section of river. Get familiar with your local dams, with when they're going to do the releases and the flows, and then start to build it as you fish these sections. Don't just give up on it. If you fish a section and you're like, well, I didn't catch anything today, it doesn't mean that you won't catch anything there next week or whenever. You got to kind of, it's process of elimination, but find those good days and you make sure you write them down.
I fish stretches and I'm like, oh, I've never fished that bank. I've never had any luck. And then I go out with someone that's never fished that stretch of river and they fish over there where I'm like, oh, I'll never catch anything. And they catch a 5-pounder, so it's like, and that's the river's always changing, man. So you can't really, you have things that work, there's always like an 80-20 rule, I think. So 80% of the time things work, but there's still that 20% that doesn't make sense, but you can't rule it out. And you always have to think outside the box in the river. I guess
I know a river that we fish, if it gets a foot higher, then we'll be slamming fish, go the next day, literally the next day it's come up a foot. and you just can't find them. And they're spread out. They're not stuck in the holes they were the day before. So, I mean, it's just crazy to think, like, why would that change that much? But it does. As Jim Salmon says, that was his line. I gave him credit for that line. I said, I think
he's still here. I told him at the end of the show I'd do
boy,
it.
there you go, Jim.
Yeah, these are the COVID cuts, you know.
There you go. Well, man, this hour went fast. Now I just want to really get out on the river because it's the time. It is the time of year to be out there for sure. That is a good look for you, by the way. Rivers change from one float to another, and that is so true. That is one thing I like about rivers as well, is that they're always changing, and probably why I like inshore fishing, because that's always changing. You know, you go to Louisiana and the marsh changes so drastically and quickly there. Gene says epic hair, by the way. The river keeps you on your toes constantly, and it does, and I love that about it. But we just burnt through an hour, man, so I really appreciate you being on here. If people would like to find out more information about Dr. McDreamy here, where could they reach out to you and ask some questions if they're wanting to get some Brooks Beatty river fishing advice?
McDreamy.com.
I don't go to that website. I'm sure that's probably
I mean, on Instagram it's Big Bites Beatty. Facebook is Brooks Beatty. I don't know. Hit me up. Hit up Jameson. He'll send you my way.
Yeah, just what we want all your good stretches of water that you've done really well on. If you could just drop pins and send those to us, we can break it down for you and tell you why the fish are there and why they're biting. So, well,
speaking of inshore fishing, I'm gonna come get that skiff here this week. Don't forget about that. Don't forget about that, Jay.
It's going up. All right, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
See ya. Thanks again, guys, for joining us. Like I said, hopefully here soon. I'm not sure the order of the new episodes, but we're going to do a crankbait one. I'm really excited about that. I love throwing a crankbait. Jim, you asking about his hair. Now you're asking what he is on Tinder. I don't know. Brooks you may have a fan, Brooks, there. But yeah, thank you guys for joining us. Hopefully things are starting to feel a little bit normal now. I know we're not out of the woods yet across the U.S., so definitely still wash your hands, try to avoid contact as much as possible, and, stay positive through all this. Hopefully everyone's doing well and can get outside and get on the water in some of the places. I personally think it's a good opportunity to stay away from people if you can avoid boat launches where people are crowding together. The river sometimes gives you some of that access to be able to get out on the water, but this is a great opportunity to do some research using Google Earth and some of the different apps to really start to build a plan and maybe think about places that you've never been before or haven't, attacked yet. So it gives you that opportunity. So, check us out next week. We're going to have another episode. It's going to be awesome. Thanks again for joining, everyone, and hope you guys have a good rest of your week. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. Thanks.